Germany's Foreign Minister Annalena Baebock has urged Georgia to push through democratic reforms to increase its chances for joining the European Union. Now, following the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, the EU awarded candidate status to Ukraine and its western neighbor Moldova, as you see on this map right here. That happened in June of last year. Georgia's government and the vast majority of its people say that they are in favor of joining the EU as well. A few weeks ago, the country was rocked by anti-government protests that a proposed law that the demonstrators said would undermine civil society. Our reporter, Maria Katamazda, has just returned from the Georgian capital, Tbilisi, to hear what people there are saying about joining the European Union.
Young Georgians spent nights and days fighting to stop their government adopting what they see as anti-democratic ideas. They want to turn decisively away from Russia and Putin. That's what makes Georgi and his fellow students take to the streets.
We are natural, historic members of the European society, and we wish to integrate into the European Union. That's written in our constitution, and that's agreed in our society.
The most recent fight was over a proposed bill which protesters say was similar to Russia's repressive foreign agents law. The bill would have let the government severely limit critical media and civil society groups.
We also considered the example of Russia, because in 2012, that's the same law they took, and it was utilized to just attack the local civil society, and of course that's the result of the Russian society's silence today about the war in Ukraine.
The Prime Minister claims the law was to protect Georgia's national interests from outside influences.
The future of our country doesn't belong to foreign agents and people who serve them. The future of this country belongs to patriots.
The government's argument, critics say, falls within the Russian narrative, something wildly unpopular among Georgian people. Anti-Kremlin sentiment has been very strong since 2008, when Putin's forces attacked Georgia over control of regions in the north and east. Russia still occupies 20% of the whole country. This was after a pro-European government started talking about joining NATO. Today, the parallels with Ukraine drive fears Georgia could be next. But despite that, Georgian support for EU and NATO is high, with independent polls pointing at 80% and rising. Even if the current government seems to flirt with Moscow, it ditched the Russian-style law under immense pressure from the streets.
This is our joint victory as a society, because we stood together, families, friends, colleagues, and we achieved it together.
And yet there is an anti-EU movement in Georgia. Some of their leaders have close links to Moscow. Georgi says he'll stay on his toes.
Well, let's cross over now to the Georgian capital, Tbilisi. I'm joined by journalist Joshua Kuchera. He's an editor at the news organization Eurasia Net. Joshua, it's good to have you on the program. It has been a few weeks since the protests over the proposed foreign agents bill began. What's the situation right now in Georgia? Has the government shelved those plans permanently?
So after those protests, it was 2 weeks ago today, I believe, the government, the ruling party, backed down and voted down the bills. Whether this is the end of the story, we don't know. The chairman of the ruling party tried to claim victory anyway, saying that the whole exercise achieved the purpose of making people aware of where these controversial NGOs were getting their money from. So I think it's safe to say that the battle between the ruling party and these NGOs is not over. But for now, at least in legislative terms, yes, the bills have been taken out of discussion.
And it's certainly getting the attention across Europe. The German foreign minister, she visited Tbilisi today, assuring the government of Berlin's support in seeking EU candidate status. How strong is the will in Georgia in the Georgian government to become a member of the European Union?
Well, among the Georgian government, I think it's still strong. I mean, I think that there's different interpretations of what the government's actions mean. I think this foreign agent law exercise kind of confused everyone and made everyone wonder exactly what their agenda was. I think it's safe to say that they do want EU membership, but they want it on their terms, and they want to maybe get it on the cheap a little bit by not implementing some of the reforms that the EU is demanding, because those reforms would loosen the ruling party's grip on power. So I think they're trying to do maybe it's fair to say the minimum that they can in terms of limiting their power while still doing enough to get into the EU.
And do you know, Joshua, why do they think that they have that kind of leverage, that they could still pursue EU membership and just barely meet the standards?
I mean, it's a good question. It's what a lot of people are asking. I think there's one school of thought that because of the Ukraine war, Georgia and everything in the neighborhood is more geopolitically important to Europe. And so Georgia is important to Europe, not only because it has a democracy, but because of where it is and its geopolitical orientation and so on, and so that they can kind of get away with, they see that there's a lot of other allies of Europe and the United States that aren't so democratic, and they think, well, you know, why do we have to jump through all of these hoops and threaten our power? Maybe we can get away with this as well.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder what the words of the German foreign minister, how much weight they have right now. I mean, she said today that Tbilisi has to implement reforms, it has to comply with democratic standards, or else. Look into your crystal ball. Are we going to see them do what is expected?
I mean, it's very difficult to say. You know, they are passing legislation. They are, you know, there's 12 areas in which the EU has demanded reforms, and the ruling party says it has legislation in the works for all of these 12 issues. There's debate on whether it's good enough. Ultimately, the decision is going to be made by the EU member states, and this is going to be a kind of political decision. I think a lot of the member states, you know, they have their own takes on this. I think it's very difficult to predict. I think the EU officials that you talk to say they wish that the ruling party would, you know, give a little more evidence that they're really engaged in this and really want it. But I also think that the risk of not giving them EU membership, which could really kind of strengthen anti-EU forces and EU skepticism here, I think EU officials also recognize that and so are nervous about the possibility of saying no.
What about this anti-EU feeling? Last week, pro-Russian protesters pulled down and set fire to an EU flag outside of Parliament in Tbilisi. And I'm wondering what's driving that sentiment and how many Georgians really feel that way.
Yeah, I think that kind of sentiment is fairly small and marginal, but they are good at getting attention. I also think it's, you know, not all of these people are pro-Russia necessarily. There are different strains of the far right here in Georgia, and some of them are anti-Russia and some of them are pro-Russia. They're all anti-EU, of course. They do, you know, they managed to hold some high-profile events. There was a notorious, really pogroms, you could call it, last year during the Pride, an attempt to hold some Pride events when dozens of journalists were wounded by these groups. But in general, they get a lot of attention and they can cause some big problems, but the societal support is very, very low.
Joshua, we appreciate your time and your analysis tonight, especially on a Friday evening. Thank you.